It's important as we're focusing on the freedom questions to also keep in mind that access remains a major challenge in several Asian countries. And this has both a global dimension as well as a set of local considerations in terms of economic and legal issues, the telecommunication infrastructure, as well as the regulatory policy and financial mechanisms that are needed to continue to expand internet penetration rates. So one of the questions that sort of overarches the panel discussion that we're going to be having today is really, for especially developing countries in Asia, how can we continue to promote the expansion of access to the internet, which is primarily a technical, commercial, and legal enterprise, while at the same time also navigating the complex legal and rights-based questions that are associated with internet freedom. So to help us understand how these issues play out in different settings and contexts across the region, we're fortunate to have 4 outstanding panelists with us today, and I'm going to introduce each of them very briefly and then invite them to give their comments. I've asked them to limit their remarks to about 10 minutes each, so we will try and preserve as much time as possible for questions and discussion at the end. But our first speaker will be Ross LeJeunesse, who is the Global Head of Free Expression and Internet Relations at Google. In that capacity, he oversees the company's relationships with governments and policymakers throughout the Asia-Pacific region, and also advises Google on data security, internet privacy, free speech, and numerous other issues affecting the company's operations and products. He will be followed by Mr. Artem Goryanov, who works for the Civil Initiative on Internet Policy at the Public Foundation of Kyrgyzstan. Main activities of his foundation are conducting research on the conditions for the growth of the ICT industry and promoting its development in his country. And in his capacity as Human Rights Ambassador, Ambassador Van Baar travels the world to promote freedom on the internet as well as human rights. So Ross, may we start with you, and then we will follow in the order that I've indicated.
Sure. Thanks, David, and thanks everyone. I'm very pleased to be here. As David mentioned, I work at Google. I lead the team that currently works on international relations, free and open internet issues, as well as trade, internet governance, and diplomatic relationships and the like. Before I took this current role, I spent 3 years as head of public policy for Asia Pacific for Google. I was based in Hong Kong. And I'm happy to start off because I just want to talk in very general terms about the trends that I've seen in the 7 years that I've been doing this type of work at Google. I remember the days when we were doing meetings with government officials, and they were sort of very introductory meetings where we would be explaining sort of what the internet was and what the power of this medium was. And we would talk about the internet's unprecedented ability to drive economic development, advance cultural understanding, awareness, that sort of thing. And I remember doing a particular meeting with an ambassador of a country that I will not name. So we do the meeting, everything is fine, and he asked me to hold back afterward to do a one-on-one privately. And the door closes, and he says to me, what is this thing? I don't get it. I don't know that, we keep talking about the internet, but I don't really know what it is. Is it like a phone? What's it like? And, I think there were probably more government officials with that level of understanding of the internet at the time than were willing to admit it. I think we've come a long way in terms of government's understanding of what the internet is, and now we're at a point where they actually are completely and fully aware of its power, and immediately thereafter are trying to figure out how to control this thing and regulate it, because they see how powerful it is. And they've been doing that in a variety of ways. A very common approach is to take media regulations that were previously applicable to television stations or radio stations or other media law and just apply them wholesale to the internet. somewhat the case in Singapore, actually, in the past couple of years. Very common approach has been to, under the guise of national security or protecting children online, which are both very important goals and the right work of government, but a lot of governments are using those frameworks to actually more tightly regulate the internet as their ultimate objective. So, I think really the primary actors we see doing this, when you think about it, are the same governments that have always controlled the access and means of communication. So it's not that surprising when you're used to having one of your officials literally sitting in the newsroom as things are being broadcast, or you're accustomed to having drafts of editorials go by the Censorship Bureau before they're released. It's not difficult to understand why they would want to do the same thing when it comes to the internet. So, I think we're in a position now where what we really have to do is, in a way, go back to the earlier conversations that I used to have with them and explain that for a lot of government officials, they think they can have it both ways. They think they can have the internet, and they'll say, look, just give me the internet, Google. They even conflate Google and the internet, which is a fairly common thing to do. They'll just say, okay, just give me the internet here, and everything's going to be fine. And it's almost going back to first principles. You have to explain that it's not, there's only the free and open internet. Anything else isn't really the internet. It's like airbrushing the smile off the Mona Lisa and still calling it the Mona Lisa. It's just not. So there's the free and open internet, or there's something else, or there's some, sort of telecommunications service or infrastructure. And then it's also a story about, it's only the free and open internet that provides for the creativity, the free exchange of ideas, the entrepreneurship, the innovation, and that's what drives the economic development. It's not internet equals economic development. There's very key elements in there that are necessary in order for the internet to be a powerful tool. So, overarching view that I wanted to provide.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about specific part of Asia. I wouldn't divide it to Asia and Europe, so I'm going to talk about post-Soviet countries. Why I'm not going to divide it? Because so in general, the most of population in our country share pretty the same values, pretty the same environment. So we've been monitored internet development in post-Soviet countries for about 10 years. So I would separate it to several steps. Like first steps, it was infrastructure development, and so we calculated the number of internet users and so on. Then it was content development, when we count some local sources of information and so on. It's still important, of course, but currently what we see is the third stage is the competition of ideas. It's the war of meanings, the war of values. It's what we see currently in the space of internet space of post-Soviet countries. So, what the problem with that? So, what we see currently, just during the, I hope you know about Ukrainian-Russian conflict. So, it opened some hidden processes, and what we see currently, for example, in Facebook, because for maybe not for the most population, but for anyway for big part of population, Facebook is just all internet. They don't need anything else. So what we see is a creation of some isolated groups of one idea. So if you are not agree to the idea, you are banned. So it means that while we are talking about balkanization of internet, while we are talking about some about danger of initiative of physical separation of some parts of internet, like for example Iran, China, Russia. So we already have informationally isolated internet, and it's much more efficient because it's cultural based. So these people, they don't want to know some other ideas, they just know that they are right, and it's all. So what's the problem for internet freedom in this case? So these groups are created by propaganda, and they are very influenced by propaganda for manipulating their opinions. And as these groups composes the most of population, so they support all government initiatives for restriction of freedom of speech, of blocking sites, filtering, and so on. So the problem that internet freedom in different countries, so I mean the meaning of internet freedom is different. And for example, some European, some legislative initiatives from, for example, going from Russia to all post-Soviet countries, they are all based on values of people, cultural values. For example, like all cybersecurity is just safety. All protection of children from harmful information is just value, it's children. So it creates, another problem that these groups are not geographically located in, for example, Russia and post-Soviet countries. It's all over the world, they're spread. It's not language based, because I know many people who, for example, who speak English perfectly, but they're very aggressive defend the policy, for example, of Russia to restriction of internet. So it's it's value-based restrictions. So we see one of the central part of this issue is cybersecurity, because almost all these things concern cybersecurity issues. And one of the ways to overcome some way this is to create some cybersecurity framework that can be accepted by all post-Soviet countries, but that adopts the main principles of internet freedom. So that's our opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer, can we turn to you? All eyes have been on Hong Kong recently. We're interested to hear about your research.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to give you a very general picture of the internet freedom situation in Hong Kong from transparency and privacy perspectives. As we all agree that internet has been a very crucial part for online organizing during the social movements. I'd like to set the example of last year's Occupy Central movement in Hong Kong, the umbrella movement. During this period, we see a lot of online organizing activities by the pro-democracy protesters. And then it turns out the law enforcement, they requested a very huge amount of metadata from the service providers without going through any legal scrutiny. And we found that it's a very big problem for our government. When we work with the legislators to question the government why they do that, they always cited the freedom, the security versus privacy debate. They said that we have seen a rising number of technology crimes in Hong Kong, so the government has to expand their power on online surveillance and censorship. On the other hand, we also heard from the online forums where the protesters posted information like criticizing the government. These online posts, they were deleted, and the web administrators told us that the police officers, they just made a phone call to the webmasters, ordering the webmaster to delete these posts without going through any due process. So these issues raised our concern over the internet freedom in Hong Kong, especially when we think about the actually there's a severe lack of privacy and fair process when the government does user data requests or content removal requests towards the service providers. In the past 5 years, according to the government release, the law enforcement agencies, they requested at least tens of thousands of warrantless metadata from the service providers. And we cannot help but asking what the government is doing in terms of respecting the citizens' privacy. And there is another aspect of the debate that the erosion of citizen privacy poses severe threat to the free flow of information and the freedom of speech in Hong Kong. So what Hong Kong Transparency Report is doing is to work with the Hong Kong legislators to encourage transparency reporting of the Hong Kong government. And we attempt to clarify the government's legal procedure through the Freedom of Information Act, and we are trying to raise the public awareness of the government censorship and surveillance in Hong Kong. So finally, we hope there can be a way that we can hold the government accountable when the government just give us the excuse of protecting the preventing and detecting crime.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Van Baar.
Thank you. When it comes to trends in Asia, say what we saw in the Freedom Online Coalition is that Asia, indeed, there were not many countries in Asia joining the coalition. So far we had Japan and Mongolia. And therefore we think it's very good that we have the Freedom Online Coalition meeting in Mongolia to show that there are in Asia, there are members who are fighting for an open, free and secure internet. We had a RightsCon organized by civil society and supported by the private sector in Manila. And that also gives, also to see what can be done to promote, say, more open, secure and free internet in the region. Because it's also the region where most of people say, are joined to the internet. So what we invited the Philippines to take part. And of course, by inviting members to a coalition, it also means that this coalition, I think they should, as Dunia Mijatovic said this morning, they should lead by example. So, and we should also hold each other to account that we keep up this open, secure, and free internet. So that is what we do with those countries here in Asia that are willing. Of course, a lot are not so much willing, and including some big ones, actually. So, well, what to do about those? Well, we have, of course, discussions in the Human Rights Council about it, and also ask questions, give recommendations on these issues. I travel and have discussion with these countries as well, and we see still, even though they have very much restricted internet access and a big surveillance, and as soon as you put something on the internet, they go after you. I met, for example, in Vietnam, I met Mother Mushroom, and she is really, everything what is, say, on the, which she thinks that should be improved in Vietnam, and especially, say, she puts it on the internet, and they really are after her, as such. And what can we do for those people? Well, I think for those people we have, together with some other members of the Freedom Online Coalition, we have the Digital Defenders Partnership set up. And they, more or less, well, they have a kind of, as well as rapid response to support people who are being threatened, but also to educate people who are online, human rights defenders who are online, to educate them how to operate online in a more secure way, so that they cannot detect you that easily, that they cannot get your information or your sources or your members and what have you. This is what we do. Of course, that's not enough. And There is another example I would like to bring, say, to the floor, and that is there are also countries that block pages, say for example in Iran, pages from BBC and others are being blocked. So via another NGO, we support an NGO that makes it possible to circumvent these blockages, and so that people in Iran still can access BBC and other pages of reliable news sources. When governments, when their vision is that internet should be, you should be able to block pages, you should be able to protect the people. When that's the case, then we have took another initiative, and that is initiative on dual use of surveillance technology. And I must say the dual use thing comes especially, say, from the military goods. If you have goods that can be used for civil purposes, but also can easily be used for military purposes, and a country, say, has not such a good record when it comes to violence and suppression of its own population, then you're not allowed to export those goods to these countries. Now there's an initiative, we took this initiative to bring to the table, and that is on surveillance technologies as well. That if, say, surveillance technologies is being exported to a country in which we think it can be easily used and abused by the government of that country not to put it in place against its citizens, then that should not be exported as such. So these are, I think, one of these initiatives that I think what we are doing, what we can do, especially when we talk about Asia, but of course it's also applicable to other countries in the world. I would like to stress one thing. When we talk, say, about governments, and my government being part of the Freedom Online Coalition, and we organize the global conference cyber space, we are also of the opinion that internet is not a government issue. Governments are, say, they talk about it as well, and they have rules and regulation indeed, but the internet is not, say, the property of a government. Internet belongs to us all. Therefore, we as the Netherlands, we are really fighting, say, for these kinds of conferences, that also other stakeholders take part. It's the private sector and civil society. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to each of our panelists. I want to commend them both for the substance of their remarks, but also for the brevity and the discipline that they've shown in sticking to the allotted time. We're going to open the floor for questions, and I invite anyone that has a question to step up to the microphone. I'm going to take the prerogative of the moderator, though, to pose the first question, and that really relates to, if you look at the countries that are in the middle, that are in the partly free zone. I think there is a tension in some ways between the kind of human rights approach and lens that basically says open, free access should be the norm, but also now increasingly some of the downside risks associated with hate speech, with harassment, with terrorism, child protection issues, etc., where I think many would acknowledge that there is a legitimate role for some governance, some governmental regulation or framework for that kind of behavior. And it's not necessarily the case that that everything that is being done on the internet could have been done through other channels. I think we heard examples of some of the harassment that people do anonymously online that probably would not be the case if it was face-to-face interaction. How well are Asian governments doing in terms of finding the right balance or striking the appropriate balance between open, free rights-based approach on the one hand, and trying to respond to what many would argue are some of these negative or potentially downside risks associated with complete internet freedom, if you will. Who would like to take a crack at that? Ross?
I'll just start off quickly and then defer to my other panelists. But I think the first thing to recognize is that it's really difficult, and I struggled with this when I was leading the Asia Pacific team. It's really difficult to talk about this region in any type of summary fashion. I mean, the countries in this region run the gamut from the most free to the most repressive. And likewise, their approaches to the internet vary a great deal as well. I think the question, however, is a very important one, which is, how do you balance online freedom with the fact that there are some things that happen online that we don't like? And I think it's a really important question. And it's a question where answers will come from not just government, as the ambassador said, but will come from necessarily civil society and users themselves. Take the example of hate speech, for example. There is an agreement even among the world's democracies about how to handle hate speech. In France and Germany, Nazi content is illegal and has to be taken offline, as it does in other fora. But it shouldn't dissuade us, I think, from trying to find these solutions which address some very real problems. And I think some government officials equate free and open internet with a free-for-all, which certainly from Google's perspective, it's not intended to be. The easiest example, of course, is child abuse imagery online. There's no place for that online. There's no place for that anywhere. And even though we like to think of ourselves and I believe we are, a company that cares very deeply about the free and open nature of the internet, when it comes to that sort of imagery, we not only take it down, but we cooperate with authorities in tracking down the origin of it. So I think it's really important to not equate free and open internet with the wild, wild west, with a free-for-all, because it's not. Earlier today, a couple panelists spoke about the fact that the same laws and regulations offline apply online. That is absolutely true. Even though we get accused of thinking otherwise, Google never professes to be anything other than subject to the law in the countries in which we operate. Sometimes we fight with them about it, and there's a very real issue between what is the law and how that law is applied, and that's where a lot of these battles take place. But the last thing I'll say is, as I mentioned earlier, the solutions just can't come only from government, and that's true in the offline world as well. I think about, I don't have kids of my own. I have 2 young nieces. I'm very involved in their upbringing. We teach our kids to do basic things to keep themselves safe and be a citizen of this world. Simple things like look both ways before you cross the street. The old adage, don't take candy from strangers, right? You think about how central the internet is in the lives of all of us today, and how that is only going to be, more and more the case. Yet far too few of us take the responsibility. Far too few schools teach online citizenship. Things like don't believe everything you read online, beware of predators online, limit your use of this stuff online, all that sort of stuff. And far too few kids grow up having had that education. And I think it's really a central part of it. And I sometimes get accused when I say that of saying, oh, you're trying to deflect responsibility. I'm not saying that's the only solution, but it's really a responsibility for all of us.
Other members of our panel want to comment on that question? Ambassador?
Yes, thank you. Well, I agree with Ross. I mean, it's also awareness. It's awareness raising. And I like the remark made by the president this morning. He said, well, more freedom leads to more creativity. he said, but also leads to more responsibility and a more responsible behavior. Well, I hope that that's the case. And I hope that also because I think the solution is not government who should regulate that. And although being, say, government official myself, I think it should not always be in the hands of government, because when a government, when you give the government more control on these kinds of things, then what you see, or what often is the case, that those who have this control, they would like to extend that and to expand that. So I think it's also about the role you have as an individual in society. You also have as being, say, a businessman in the IT business in society, or as civil society, or as government as such. So it is about responsibility, indeed. And I also would like to stress, it is what you offline and online, the same rules and regulations apply, and also the same values.
I'd like to comment again from Hong Kong's situation. In Hong Kong, the legal and regulatory development over the internet is very lagging behind the internet, the technology itself. So in many cases, the law enforcement's power is expanding infinitely on the internet, and there is no oversight. So there is like a great freedom for the government to interpret the outdated law to regulate hate speech, like child pornography, etc. on the internet. And on the other hand, the service providers, the local service providers, they are under no pressure to protect the users' freedom on the internet. For instance, based on a lot of local forums we've been interviewing, is that in some cases they want to refuse the government's request to access user data, but they are also under great law enforcement pressure. They don't want to be labeled by the government that they are not on the government's side. So the local service providers, they are also in an embarrassing situation when they try to balance the users' freedom and the law enforcement's need to protect public safety. So it returns to the question that in Hong Kong, there is currently no efficient oversight over the government power, which is a big concern for both the service providers from their business perspective and from the users' online freedom perspective.
Art. So I think all of us agree that education is a crucial part in the process. But I would say that, as I told before, the values is also the issue, because, for example, if you ask the most of people in post-Soviet countries that you are traced, you asked, so what? I don't have anything to hide. So unfortunately, the most of population doesn't have fundamental human rights as the priority value. So the problem is changing the priorities of the values to human rights. That's, I think, the most problem, because the most of population supports some restrictive legislation of government. They say, yes, you're right, we must be restricted. There's a problem because they have different values.
Population, you want to control your internet users, force data providers, it's called data localization, force them to put the service online. I can tell you that I don't think a final decision has been made about what we're going to do about that situation. I can tell you with complete honesty that we are very well aware of the consequences if we comply, and there's a very real conversation going on about what we do about this situation. As you know, we were very engaged trying to convince them not to go in that direction all along, but they did, and now there's been no decision. So I'd like to get your information afterward, if I could, so that I can stay in touch with you about that, but I don't have an answer for you. But again, I do want to emphasize that we are extremely aware of the implications of complying with that.
Yes, question
Hi.
over here.
A quick comment or supplement. I'm Michael Mo from Amnesty International Hong Kong. So just to supplement the situation of online freedom in Hong Kong and some regions, in some countries in Southeast Asia region. We have got over 20 activists being arrested and some of them being charged simply because they advocate or to call people to protest on the street during the Occupy movement back in 2014. The authorities would use the charge of access to computer with misconduct or criminal intent. So this is one of the tricks that East Asian, I would say, countries are really good at, is to try to use other security-related laws, which is completely unrelated to online expression, freedom, or internet securities of some sort, to oppress freedom of expression online. And we have seen the Sedition Act of Malaysia has been utilized by the Malaysian government to suppress bloggers and some activists who called out to protest. We have seen the real Singapore, the alternative or the online media website has just been shut down by an executive order issued by the Singaporean government. And we have also seen Myanmar and Vietnam, using penal codes to charge or detain online journalists as well. So I cannot say whether it would be quite pessimistic, but I would say the trend that in the period which East Asian or Southeast Asian countries are not really advancing their surveillance laws of some sort, they are still getting ways around to do to oppress the activists or people who want to voice out online.
Jennifer, go ahead.
Okay, so I'd like to make a quick remark on the audience comment. So we've been seeing the trend of the government is using the access to computer with dishonest or criminal intent to arrest and prosecute online users. And our Secretary for Security actually commented at a legislative council meeting that the police the police officers, the law enforcement, they prefer to use they have two options. They can either use the Section 161, the Computer Crime Ordinance, to prosecute the online users, or they can prosecute the online users with the real public, citing public, instigating public as an offense. But the reason why the law enforcement, they are using the Computer Crimes Ordinance, which is originally designed to prosecute like credit card thefts, hackers, is because this Computer Crimes Ordinance is easier to prosecute. It has become it has become an easy tool for the government to use to control online speech. So it is a very worrying trend, and our legislators is trying to let the government release how many cases the law enforcement, they are using the Computer Crimes Ordinance to prosecute the online user rather than using the more reasonable instigating public offense as the charge. So we are following this controversial use of law closely. So that's my comment. Thank you.
We have one more question here.
Hi, I'm representing Mongolian government organization. So I have I want to just make an addition to the moderator's question to firstly ask it. So is there any country that well balanced that those two contradicting issues, in one hand the freedom open online, and on the other hand the negative issues of the online? So is there any country that well balanced? and why you think so. So, and the second question is there any recommendations or guidance from the international organizations regarding those issues? Thank you.
Well, I think, say, a lot of countries, there are quite some countries who do not have, say, that much specific legislation for online. As I said earlier, you know, the balance is also found in the legislation that you have already, say, for offline activities, and that is, say, what you see. It is, of course, a thing, as was pointed out as well, where you're struggling with, and as our friend from Kyrgyzstan pointed out as well, that if there's a lot of, say, internet porn on the internet, then of course there's a public outcry to do something, and there's also then a lot of support to control the internet. I still think, you know, these kinds of things also can be regulated via the legislation which is for offline, which is applicable to offline publications and what have you. The only thing what comes into, of course, is the provider or somebody who has to take it down. And I think what is important in that sense is that if these things happen, that there is transparency, so that you know what is happening.
I would just add to that I think if you want to talk about really positive examples, you have to talk about countries that not only get, societies that not only get the balance right between freedom and openness and, you know, effectively dealing with issues like national security, but countries that go even beyond that, like Estonia, which is building its future government engagement, its basic government engagement with its citizenry. And granted, it's a small country and it's relatively easy for it to do this, but, you know, primary interaction with the citizenry is through online tools. You can vote online. You know, they're very clear about prioritizing IT as an industry there. The educational system does a very good job of teaching online skills. So the real leaders in this space are going far beyond trying to strike that right balance and are doing really innovative and interesting things with this technology in terms of, you know, it's promoting its economic development and things of that nature. If you haven't seen it, again, I want to tout the Freedom House's report, Freedom on the Net, which it releases every year. Google is a big supporter of that work financially, and what we're trying to do is give them additional funding so that they cover more and more countries in their report. That's why you don't see Mongolia in the current version of the report. They simply don't have the money to do every country, but we're working with them to get them to the point where they're covering almost all of them. And so I would point you to that as well. I'm an American, so I have an American point of view when it comes to hate speech, quite frankly. But I don't pretend to say that that is the right approach for Myanmar when they figure this thing out. I mean, our approach at Google is that the best answer to hate speech is more speech, right? That if you think you're going to deal with hate speech by just censoring it out, first of all, you're on a fool's errand because you're never going to find it all. It's just all, you know, it's there. But you're not really dealing with the fundamental issue when you do that. All you're doing is driving that speech underground, and you're not really engaging the speaker in any sort of meaningful dialogue about what his or her views are. I said this at a dinner once with the French ambassador last week, and he just laughed at me. He said, "Oh, you're so American, you're so optimistic, you know, because their approach is very different." But, you know, it's up to Myanmar to figure this out. What's right for them, for their culture, for their society, and where that society is in its evolution, right? But I encourage Myanmar to, and we're doing this, to look at sort of positive examples in the region and learn from those examples.
Great. I want to invite all of you to join me in thanking our panelists. I think they've done a terrific job. And I also want to thank all of you for attending after lunch and for foregoing other competing sessions. It also had very interesting speakers and panelists, but I want to reassure you, you all made the right decision and the right choice coming to this session. So thank you all for coming.